Hold on, maybe this will work. Okay. Are we good, Joe? Good evening. I'm John Miko, the Executive Director of the Union League Legacy Foundation. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Civil War Roundtable. My apologies for the technical difficulties I was having. The Union League Legacy Foundation is the nonprofit charity of the Union League of Philadelphia. Guided by the United States Constitution and the history and values of the Union League, our mission is to create better informed, more engaged citizen leaders. We do this through a host of programs throughout the year, including programs on civics and citizenship to high school students, through lectures like tonight's Civil War Roundtables, exhibits, scholarships to deserving young future leaders, and through partnering with organizations throughout the city of Philadelphia. All this is made possible through the voluntary contributions of Union League members and others who share our values and want us to create better citizens. Tonight we have a wonderful program, Civil War Roundtable, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end of our program that'll be moderated by Jim Mundy. If you'd like to ask a question, you can ask it during any part of the program by simply using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom app down at the bottom. So I think we're going to get to the questions at the end of the program, but they can be asked at any time during the program. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the historian of the Union League Legacy Foundation, Mr. Jim Mundy. Jim.
Okay, had to unmute there. Thanks, John, very much. Welcome, everybody, to another wonderful program of our Civil War Roundtable. I think what will make this evening's program really different is the fact that we have a speaker who has actual Army experience. Most of our speakers really don't, and so they don't necessarily have the ability, the experience to connect the dots between what is and what was and how the two are related in some way, shape, or form. So I think that Lieutenant Colonel Howard Knudsen, our speaker tonight, will bring that to the table and make it a really different kind of program and much more and very fascinating. Harold's a 24-year active military veteran. He has served both in American and German field artillery schools. So you can see how that kind of experience will play into what he's going to talk about tonight with General Longstreet. He's a veteran of Desert Storm in Iraq, where he again was involved with tactical operations and things like that. He's put in time, at, of course, through the Army and in the Pentagon and in RP operations and in tactical support. So again, all these different components to his experience in the Army will lead to his tale about what he thinks is, or who he thinks is, the Confederates' most modern general. So on that note, Lieutenant Colonel, please take it away. It's a great pleasure to introduce you.
Thank you very much. This is the, let me introduce this here. This is the cover of the book, if you can see it. This is what it looks like in its size. So if anyone's interested, I can put together a bunch of them. I'll sell them for $20 a piece, and then I'll mail them. The more there are, the less expensive it would be. So we can talk about that later or offline later, but that's what it looks like. And let me see if I can, oops, not advancing here. Having a technical problem with my advancing my slides. Here we go. Can you see the hotel there, everybody? Anyone?
You have to go back to sharing your screen.
Okay. Let's see how I do this. Can someone see the cover of this book here?
Yes, you're good now.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me start again. This is the cover of the book, just so you can see it. This is before I start, I want to just show this place. This is the Piedmont Hotel, and I'm part of this organization, which is called the Longstreet Society. They're in Gainesville, Georgia. And they are an organization that takes care of this hotel, and we work and preserve the legacy of General Longstreet. We have a couple of large events every year. 3 of them are held at that hotel there in the spring. There's a Christmas, there's a birthday celebration at the grave, and then once a year we do a seminar at a battlefield or a campaign area where he was, where he served in. And this year, this past October, we were at Antietam. Next year will be Gettysburg. So if you're interested in this, please look at the Longstreet Society online and just check it out for a few minutes. You might find it interesting. It's also a pretty good resource for research on the general. In addition to what Jim introduced me with my bio, I'm going to just leave this up here for a minute. These are some of my schools, and again, some of the overview of my career. But I just want to say that, as he said, this is my purpose in looking at General Longstreet through the lens of my military understanding, with small unit tactics, operational art, strategy, fire support, and so on. I got to realize when I became a professional soldier that a lot of the things that General Longstreet was maligned about as a victim, as I call him, a victim of the lost cause movement after the war, I came to realize a lot of that was certainly political propaganda, not really military reality. And then I became interested in him, and that became the genesis, the impetus of why I decided to write about him, to correct his record, but also to show that there was this general on the South Side that I thought was quite modern. The things that he was doing became method of war in the 20th century, and some of them still are method of war. So that was why I came at him this way. And tonight I'm going to talk to you about 2 of his major examples in the tactical level, one for the defense that he did at Fredericksburg on a large scale, and one for the offense that he does on a large scale at Chickamauga. In between that, a little bit about his strategic estimate of the war at that point. And then the last part, I'm going to explain to you what is operational art within the context of the Chattanooga campaign. So those are the 3 primary pillars of where we're going to go tonight, and through that lens of why I think he's a modern general. So Army officers coming out of West Point or another academy in the antebellum decades, coming into the Army as a second lieutenant, generally had an understanding of Napoleonic warfare and that the tactical offense was dominant. As in this painting here, there's 2 sides in an engagement, in a battle in that time period. They had to get somewhat close to each other, and that was because of the technology of the period, of the firearms of the period. This one here is the British Brown Bess, and other countries had similar versions. This one, many millions manufactured between those years that I have up there on the top of the slide. And a weapon like this could be fired about 3 times per minute, and as the quote there says, could strike a figure at about 80 yards, maybe even 100, but somebody would be unfortunate who would be wounded at 150 yards. So the tactics of the units were built around this. The British, for example, they might stand in these line formations about 80 yards out, and they'll take a volley. Some will get hit, but they're at the max range of effective max range. So then they start to move forward. They might close the distance halfway, stop at 40 yards, and then fire on their opponent. And since they're closer, they've cut the distance, they're going to have a greater probability of hitting their opponent and cutting them down, and then they can finish with the bayonet as they come at them at these perfect automatons. So that is the reason why the belief at the time was that the tactical offense, all things being equal, the direct approach tactical offense was understood to be the dominant method of war. Now, there were examples, though, even in this period of time, when the defense could thwart the tactical offense. And this was when the defense was built around works, and you had a a resolute leader who had made some preparations and had instilled confidence in his men. You have two examples here, fairly lopsided examples here, Bunker Hill and New Orleans, where the attackers sustained heavy casualties. They were very, very lopsided results. Now, Bunker Hill did seize their objective, but not without great cost. In New Orleans, they did not. They were defeated and with horrendous casualties. And so those people who could see this and understand this, I think were the ones who were the more modern thinking perspective. Was injured. And I think that probably
Hi, Harold. It looks like you lost connection for a second. You are back online now.
okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you just have to share your screen again.
All right. Can you see the Antietam map?
Yes.
Okay. So at this particular battle, he's got these North Carolina regiments sitting in this sunken road. Oh, no, I can't seem to advance my slide. There we go. In this sunken road that you can see in this particular drawing, the Union coming at them from the left, moving to the right perpendicularly. And here his men were sheltered up from about the middle of the leg and only presented from the middle of the thigh up to the top of their head. And they were than the Union soldiers coming at them. So their volleys were lower, better aimed their fire control. This position became the strongest position on the Confederate defense at the Antietam, and they inflicted quite a few casualties on the Union Army there. It was outflanked and it was penetrated at one point, and Longstreet had to shore using fire support, and they field by the end of the day. But after this battle, he thought this through from between September and December, and when it became clear that General Burnside was taking over for the Union Army and going to make a drive on Richmond and come through Fredericksburg, General Lee ordered General Longstreet out here first, and then he would go get Stonewall Jackson and bring him in. And General Longstreet arrives at Fredericksburg, and he sees this plain, which you can see there in the top picture between the town and the base of Mary's Heights, and that's where he's going to set up what we call in modern terminology his kill zone. He also finds another sunken road, which is the lower left-hand corner picture. That's a section of it, which is much better than the one he had at Antietam. This particular one has a stone wall that his men can lean up against, rest their elbows on while they're aiming, and only present from the shoulders up while they're still lower than their Union counterpart. And then he's going to do the same with artillery, have that all centered in, aimed in with many of the guns, revetted behind dirt up to their muzzle for protection for the gun crews as well. And I'll explain that also here in a minute. But all of this he's going to set up this nasty kill zone for the Union Army. When Burnside gets there, he's got to ford the river and come to the town from the other side, get to the town of Fredericksburg from the other side. Now, what General Longstreet does is he does not oppose them very much in the town. He has some troops in the town, sharpshooters, to harass them, but he doesn't put a lot of men in there because he doesn't want to make this the main defense line. He's doing this on purpose to draw them in, to draw Burnside in, to let them come across, get into the town, take the town, and then funnel all their troops in there, get them reassembled, and then feed them into his kill zone, where he has clear fields of fire instead of street fighting. So that's his plan, and that's how it unfolds. Now, the morning phase before Burnside comes after Longstreet, he's going to try the other side, which is off this map to the right, which would be Stonewall Jackson when he got there. Stonewall Jackson only has about a day to prepare. He does a little bit of digging, and so the result of that little bit of digging is his men are protected about as much as Longstreet's were at Antietam, from their middle of the legs up to the top of their head. They're just presenting. And so his line is penetrated at one point by Major General Meade, who's a division commander, and he masses him and pushes him back out, and that ends the morning phase. So the afternoon phase, the Burnside starts in against Longstreet, defending the strongest, the best prepared position on the Confederate side at 1 p.m. As you can see, then they're going to come through the town, and they're going to go right through that open area to assault the base of Murray's Heights. But they do this repeatedly all afternoon, from 1 till about 3:30, 3:45. About 13 large assaults in all are completely broken up, and that dotted line there between the forward Union position and the Confederate position at the wall is where most of the Union soldiers were cut down that were casualties here. And it is said that none of them got within even 100 feet of the wall. So this was done the casualties were huge. This was done on a massive scale. And, General Lee was up there with him watching, which has produced one of his famous quotes, which I'm sure everyone has read, like this one here. It's well that war is so terrible, or we would grow fond of it. So I think the thing here that produces this radical lethality in 1862, and really is truly an employment of the principles of the 20th century kill zone, standard doctrine in the United States Army that I learned right from the beginning in basic training, was how he set this up. Clearly delineated lanes of fire for his infantry. And that means that he creates a kill zone. Now, a perfect kill zone is going to be somewhat concave. This is more linear, but with a concave one, you want to get these interlocking fields of fire, and that's important for this idea about delineated lanes of fire, because each infantryman will only be assigned a lane right in front of him. Usually, we put 2 sticks in the ground. The sergeants do that to show the soldiers where they are allowed to shoot within and where not to go, where they cannot shoot in. They see a target off to the right or something that's not their target, they're not to touch that. Somebody else down the line is responsible for that. And in this case, they don't have automatic weapons in this time period, but what he does here, as you can see in this picture, which was sketched about 20 years after the war, they had a line of firers and then 1 to 2 loaders behind each man. So the firer would, shoot the rifle and hand back the empty and get a loaded rifle, and then shoot again and then hand back the empty and get another loaded one from the next guy. So that brings up the rate of fire from 3 rounds per minute up to 9, 10, 11 rounds per minute. So if everyone's doing that increased the rate of fire. It's like, achieving the effect of the machine gun in a very tight area. And that's why I see this as a very modern type of kill zone that he does here for the infantry. And then we'll talk to the artillery here for a moment as well. There's a pretty well-known picture of an artillery battery in the Civil War, usually 6 guns for the field artillery. There'd be 3 off to the left or to the right. This gun could shoot about 1 mile. And on this chart, you'd see the left gray arrow there at the bottom left there, close to the red explosion, that would be on this scale here where the field artillery piece would be. It could shoot about 1.5 miles. It'd be a direct fire shot. It would not have much of an arc to it, so the gun crews could see where they're shooting at until smoke obscured the area. Now later in the war, 1863, started to have some of your first rifle cannon. Could shoot a little bit over 2 miles. I have one depicted there. But later, 1885 and further into the 20th century. But in the 1880s, they really perfected the breech loading gun that could withstand the pressures of the expanding gases that were hurled around out the front of the gun, and that allowed artillery to shoot at targets far beyond the horizon, far beyond what you could see, and that required then precise mathematical computations, a grid system. We have this thing we call the RDP, the range deflection protractor, which is a picture of one here for doing the calculations by hand. And so we got to the point where everything was very, very precise, tied in with wire communications and then radio and then computers as well. But my gun, for example, in Desert Storm was that 155 millimeter one with the turret on it. It shoot about 15 miles, all kinds of different projectiles. So the one off to the far right, 8-inch, 203 millimeter, came into the inventory in the 1950s, and we used it through Desert Storm, could shoot over 20 miles. And when around at that range, high angle, the round is in the air 7 miles high before it starts to come down. So what does all this mean? It means that now you can spread out your artillery all over the place and tie it in precisely with all of these calculations and with communications. Now, to do this, by the time of the Second World War, they also started to develop the computers, big, huge, clunky computers in that period of time. This was the first ones were going to be for naval gunfire. They weren't going to use them in the field. But today, all of this capability, of course, is now in a laptop, and it goes into a track vehicle. It's what we call an FDC, a fire direction center, and then we tie all this together, with radio and with digital communications to either tie all artillery together to assault one target, or still leave it decentralized for the maneuver units. So this would be, and go back to the doctrine of the 18th and 19th century. So back then, in this example here, let's say that terrain feature on the bottom is Mary's Heights. We would say that in modern parlance, we would say the artillery was generally decentralized direct support of the maneuver unit. So say those 4 guns on the left are a battery. They would be supporting a, say, Confederate infantry unit right in front of them, and they're servicing targets to help out that unit. But they don't fire across the right of their neighbors. It's too far away generally, and it would cause problems. They might hit their own guys. But in modern artillery, we can centralize also, reinforcing fires. But this is what Longstreet does with artillery at Fredericksburg. He doesn't have radio, he doesn't have computer communications to tie all this together, but he sets it up in the same way that we would, so that it's all centralized, not serving the individual brigades, but working for his artillery coordinator, who was Porter Alexander. And he tied it all together for the Corps commander, which was Longstreet, or the wing commander at the time, which was General Longstreet. And it worked rather well in concert with the infantry. The first 3 Union assaults were broken up exclusively by the artillery before they even got close enough. And if you look at the dotted lines there coming in from the lower right, something else I saw when I went to Fredericksburg years ago, up on this hill that's off to the bottom right, is one now called Lee's Hill, where Lee had his headquarters. Now, before General Lee showed up, Longstreet had called down to Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond to get some of these heavier ordnance pieces, the ones that could shoot 2 miles. Then they were not field artillery. They had to be hauled up in wagons and set on the ground. But they could shoot over, the way he had them set up, and you can see it from the battlefield today, they would shoot over their field artillery, over the infantry, into the kill zone to service targets there, which I thought was pretty amazing. That's what we do today. So, this example here is one of the reasons, that one of the strong pieces of evidence I think that General Longstreet was thinking in a very modern way. It would become method of war into the 20th century. And I like this quote that I found just about a year ago, actually, Battles and Leaders, that he said, excuse me, this is the situation: 65,000 Confederates massed around Fredericksburg, and they had 20 odd days in which to prepare for battle. Now that's his guys. As I said, Stonewall Jackson showed up only a day before, but the preparation makes all the difference. Going back to that, my earlier mention about why the tactical defense then was dominant, or would be dominant over the offense when it was well prepared. Excuse me. So after Fredericksburg, after December 1862, going into the new year, General Longstreet looks at the result and realizes that the Confederate side, have a method that we can harness to use against the Union, and that is to try and recreate perhaps some of these defensive, lopsided, painful mass casualty events. And we need to do something about this. Can be used in the something that we need to do to counteract the Union grand strategy. I mean, the reality is the Confederates did not have a grand strategy in the war, but the Union did. Right in the beginning, aging General Winfield Scott, advised the Lincoln administration about this idea of what he called the Anaconda Plan. He'd have a naval blockade in the Atlantic Ocean and along in the Gulf of Mexico to prevent shipping logistics coming in from Europe. They divide the Confederacy down the Mississippi River, and the last component would be multiple Union armies would attack the Confederacy, should be synchronized, and that would defeat the South. That was the basic plan of the Anaconda Plan. Good plan. But the last part with the synchronized attacking of large Union armies on the Confederacy, that didn't come together very well until Grant was put in charge, by 1864, and he coordinated that. Until then, the Confederacy was allowed to mass when it needed to, for the most part, to thwart some of to try and thwart some of these attacks on the viable Confederacy. So Longstreet looks at this: what is the defensible perimeter of the Confederacy that they need to hold on to? Now, they have enough, soldiers and equipment for three principal armies, and those are the one in Virginia under Lee, the one in that had been operating in Kentucky in 1862 under Bragg, is now in Tennessee being pushed south. And then you've got the situation that you've got troops in Mississippi trying to hold on to that state, and Vicksburg. And then you've got a rail line, several rail lines, the two different colors, the red and the green, depict different gauges, which is problematic, but they could still use it. It's not as good as what the North has, but it's something, And so he comes up with the idea of what I call this defensive offense. Defensive meaning defensive, strategic defense, but operational level offenses, where you would build windows of numerical strength, flex units, deploy units to different theaters as quickly as possible to build up a numerical superiority over a select Union target, attack it or defend against it, try to break it up, take it into captivity, whatever, get a good result, and then realign again and wait for the next thing, and perhaps run out the clock. There's also a political aspect to this, component to this, and that was perhaps they could run out the clock to November of 1864, and maybe, just maybe, the casualties to the Union would be so horrendous that it would be difficult for Lincoln to win re-election. So these are some of the thoughts that General Longstreet has going into 1863 for his strategic estimate. He then, therefore, advocates for Western concentration. And General Lee he's kind of against this at this time, still being parochial to Virginia. And Lee, of course, being the top guy in the East and having a lot of clout with Jefferson Davis, pretty much overrules that idea, and he gets his invasion of Pennsylvania approved. And then he also, he works on General Longstreet with this to gets Longstreet to at least go along with it in theory. And Longstreet says, well, then if we do that, I think this was at least his belief that Lee agreed to that they would to a defensive battle if they went up there, if they could set one up, and that after they had reorganized the army after the loss of Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville, and having to promote two major generals to lieutenant generals, A.P. Hill and Dick Ewell, that they would now have three corps. Longstreet would have the first, and that he would receive an assault with his corps, and the other two would protect his wings, something like that. Now, in my opinion, from my research, I don't think Lee ever really promised this to Longstreet. I think Longstreet thought that was their understanding, so they were probably talking past each other. But anyway, that becomes the genesis of this invasion of Pennsylvania, and of course, we know that this doesn't work out well for the South. They're defeated at Gettysburg. But this is I want to show you one slide here to give you a hypothetical, at least, of what he meant, what Longstreet meant by what his idea was then there for a Western concentration to fix the problem of General Grant going after Vicksburg, to try and prevent that from happening. Now, as we know, Grant had tried to take Vicksburg and had been stopped twice already. And so then he tried, his third attempt was to bring the army south of the city, land across the river there at Bruinsburg. And then the Confederates thought, General Pemberton, who was the commander of the Confederate forces in Vicksburg, that Grant would move then directly north from the Bruinsburg, Port Gibson area and head right north to Vicksburg, where Pemberton would meet him because he had defenses all the way around. But that's not what Grant does. Grant does this strange thing by moving northeast toward Jackson there to the right side of the slide, which confuses the Confederate leadership in the state. There are three separate entities. You've got Pemberton with the most troops, Johnson with 8,000, and then 5,000 more a little bit to the north. And so by Grant doing this, they don't come together to go after him when he doesn't have all of his troops yet across the river. He has to take this tactical pause there where it says Grant 35,000. He's waiting for Sherman to come up. Now, that would have probably been the best time with these numbers of Confederate troops to go after him, because if they did that, you can see the numbers in the lower left, 36,000 to 35,000. You've got numerical parity, and you have a chance. I'm not saying they would have defeated Grant, but you have a chance instead of being split up into three different pieces. Well, they don't do that. Now, what Longstreet was advocating, of course, is that in a timely manner, they bring troops enough in from the east to, bring their numbers way up. If something like this happened and they coordinated them, then they would have, say, 56,000 to 35,000, much better chance to do something about Grant and prevent his operation from being successful. So that was one of his ideas that is his general idea of this defensive offense, this is being an operational piece of work to try and go against Grant, who's trying to take Vicksburg. Well, that doesn't happen, and as we know, things didn't work out for them in Gettysburg either. They were defeated on the third day and had to go back to Virginia. On the 4th of July, they get the news that Vicksburg has fell. So not a good week for the Confederacy, and they need to do something soon and try and turn it around. They need a win. And now Lee is in agreement that a Western concentration is what they'll do with the other army now under Bragg that's been pushed down into northern Georgia. And right at the end, as General Rosecrans here has wrapped up his excellent Tullahoma campaign. But now Rosecrans has made a mistake. Now you can see in this map here, his three primary corps, Crittenden, Thomas, and McCook, are way too spread out. They cannot support each other if one of them gets attacked. And the one in the middle under Thomas, he's even done the same mistake at the division level. He's got a division a little too far forward, with the rest of it further back on the other side of Missionary Ridge. So Bragg, to his credit, he recognizes this and he goes after the middle corps to try and clip it and destroy it when it's alone. And that becomes his battle plan. He hasn't received all of the reinforcements yet, but he's going to try to. And so he moves toward the center corps under Thomas. Well, he's got his own problems in his army. And so the coordination doesn't come together. And Rosecrans is able to mostly assemble his army, but it's sloppy on both sides. Now, Bragg's plan here, this is an older map, as you can see. His army are the red units. He's going to try and fold the Union left and push them down along the south side of Missionary Ridge into that area that I have there in a gray oval, and that's a place called Lemore's Cove. And we call that in the military non-permissive terrain. It's not a very good place to exercise command and control, primarily hilly, heavily wooded area. You can't see all of your units. And if he can do that and separate them from their new supply base at Chattanooga, I think the Union Army there, the Army of the Cumberland, would be in an awful lot of trouble. So I think Bragg's initial plan there is pretty good. So he tries to do this they make first contact on the 18th of September, and he tries to make this plan work to push them and fold them down that way on the 19th of September. This is before Longstreet gets there. There are only a couple of brigades, 3 of them from Virginia have shown up, and General Longstreet had sent General Hood forward to be in charge of them, and they joined the battle on the 19th. So the left wing there, which has Hood and Buckner and Hill, they're like an orchestra without a conductor. They try to push on the Union still all the same, but it's very disjointed and disorganized. And then the attacks on the right are not, they're under Polk, but they're not very well executed either. So the whole Confederate Army pushes on the Union Army, but they don't fold the flank and they don't penetrate anywhere. They just shove the Union Army back. And they maintain the initiative on the 19th. But the bad news for the Confederates is Rosecrans, as I said, has had the chance to assemble his 3 primary corps and the reserve corps. So his army is all put back together, and that bodes well for him. So the chance to take that Union corps by itself evaporated. General Longstreet shows up on the night of the 19th, about 11 o'clock in the evening. He has to go find General Bragg, finds him at about 11 around between 11 and midnight. They have a meeting, and General Bragg assigns him to handle the left wing of the army. And 2 more brigades show up with General Longstreet. So there are now 5 there from Virginia. So what happens is Bragg wants to rework the same plan, start on the right, this time with an echelon attack, and that means each unit will, the most right unit will start, and then the next to the left, and the next, and the next, and the next, and so on, all the way down until the whole army is pushing, and they're going to try and shove the Union again south west toward Lemore's Cove, and into that difficult terrain and demolish them that way. Well, what happens is, again, the orders don't get down to the most right unit. The attack doesn't happen until late in the morning, and that gives the Union time for position improvement. And they stop the Confederate right. So General Longstreet doesn't know what's going on. At 7 o'clock in the morning, he was expecting to start hearing the fighting, but it doesn't start until about 10. And so he has to improvise. He realizes this isn't going to work. An echelon attack is now irrelevant. So he comes up with something else, and he comes up with a column that I'm going to explain here in a minute. It's a modern type of column. You can see in this picture here, this map here, he penetrates the Union right side of the army, the right wing, totally collapses it. They panic. General Rosecrans flees the battlefield to Chattanooga, and the army starts to collapse and run. General Thomas, the quick-thinking Union General Thomas, takes over and is able to rally men on a terrain feature called Snodgrass Hill. You can see that the units there in the center, just above the center of this map. And he's able to hold against Longstreet's attack into the dark, into when it becomes dark, and then he's able to extricate the army, and and get them out of there, take up positions on Missionary Ridge. So that's the Battle of Chickamauga. But what I want to show you is this is an Alfred Wad picture. There are a few of these I have in here. This is Longstreet's troops downloading. I suppose that's supposed to be him there in the lower left-hand corner. But what I want to explain what he does that's a modern thing here at this battle is this attack column. Now, this is the Brotherton cabin, and it just happens to be that there's a Private Brotherton in one of the Georgia regiments that's in the Army of Northern Virginia in his corps, and he summons him, and he grew up in his house right there at the battlefield, where he's looking for some place to penetrate the Union line. Brotherton tells him that, yeah, there's a cow trail off to the right. This is what it looks like today. Of course, it's a paved road, but when you look through the trees, you can see the open area. Longstreet wants to get to the open areas there in behind it and get to the fast go terrain and keep this column that he's going to build together. Now, let me fast forward a minute to the Second World War. This man here in the bottom right, Hans Gadarian, is who we call in the Army, consider him the grandfather of offensive armored warfare. Gadarian believed that the engine of a tank is no less a weapon than the gun of a tank. And if you mass these things in divisions, he's the one who built the first armored divisions in the 1930s. And you use the tank division to attack and penetrate a very narrow front with lots of strength. And you don't become decisively engaged, say, with all those Russian units there in the front, but you push through, and then you drive the tanks into the rear areas, and you go for the headquarters. You rip down the communications, you attack their supply lines and everything, and you just use your infantry units to fix in place the opposing infantry. Even if they're a much larger army and they outnumber you, you will be able to collapse your opponents, and the Germans did this with this doctrine that became known in slang as Blitzkrieg during the war by using this method, this doctrine. And the thing that was so special about it at the tactical level was in the German word, the Schwerpunkt, the point of the main effort. The German word Schwer means heavy. Another, the literal translation would be heavy point. How you weight an attack and how, on a narrow front. So this is what Longstreet is, what the disposition of the Confederate troops that Longstreet finds on the night of the 19th, going into the early morning of the 20th, September 1863. He has 4 divisions, Western divisions there up front, Preston, Hyman, Johnson, Stewart, and then there's this vacant space between that wing and Polk's wing. And then you got 5 brigades sitting there behind him under Hood. So he slides them all over to the right, and that's what these arrows are. And then the division of Bushrod Johnson is now depicted there in that column as Fulton, McNair, and Sugg. And then you got the 5 Virginia brigades behind them. And he arrays them in 5 echelons, as you can see. 8 brigades in 5 echelons, very narrow, instead of a wide front. And then what happens, now he doesn't know this, but Major General Wood on the Union side across the way is just a 2-brigade division. He expects there's at least a 1 division in front of him where he's going to throw this Schwerpunkt into. And he figures that, now we say in modern doctrine, in our schools, that we require a 3-to-1 attacker to defender force ratio to be reasonably assured of penetrating an enemy line. And here he plans for 4-1 because he knows there's a division in front of him. Most divisions have, say, 3 brigades. And so that, and at their depth, at their best depth, they have 1 brigade forward, 1 brigade back. That would be 2 brigades depth at its most. He's got 8 here, so that would be 4-1 odds. But as I said, this Major General Wood is going to be told to move out of the way and go reinforce the other wing. And that creates a gap in the Union line. As it's moving, 1 brigade is still in the way. So it's 1 Union brigade gets steamrolled by 8 brigades when Longstreet gives the nod for this thing to go in at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And that's what this picture depicts here. So, the thing that is so modern about this, that's so much different from what they had been doing in the Civil War, generally speaking, is somebody finally, looked on a large scale of how we concentrate strength at one point to force a breakthrough, like a lot of these Germans became good at in the Second World War. And this is a comment that Rummel made, when he's trying to break the Tobruk defenses. The reality of the Africa Corps was a lot of these younger commanders that were under him, they didn't really still fully understand what these major generals and lieutenant generals were doing with the army. They were not, they hadn't been to schools about this. They were learning this as they go. So he was running around the battlefield, riding herd on these commanders to get them to do this. And that's how they got, more and more proficient at it as an army. It's the same thing with the United States Army. We were latecomers to this, and we had very few people who thought about this at all. Here you see this, even as late as 1944, you see that line there after the landings, and General Patton, who is yet still not quite in the game yet, still in the doghouse at that point, has this quote here about watching this and being very frustrated about what he's seeing that Eisenhower and all the subordinates are doing. They try to push all along the front, but have no power anywhere, he says in this particular comment in 1944. And here's a letter that Eisenhower sketched himself by early July. The Germans actually had the landings pretty well arrested once they got the reinforcements into France. And, you don't generally see this in the context of movies or film, things like the Band of Brothers and whatnot. Everyone thinks that they landed and bulled their way into France. Everything worked out great. That wasn't exactly true in the first month, at all here. And, it almost seemed at one point Eisenhower was going to quit, but, this man here is the one who had the same kind of vision and gets the breakout to happen. So that's what you have here at Chickamauga. You have here, it's a big improvement over what happened at Gettysburg. They were only about 175 paces. I paced it out from where they come out of the wood line there at the Brotherton cabin to attack the front of the Union line, which by now are really only pickets. And see, it's a big improvement over Gettysburg. Look at the huge distance in the open area that they had to go. This is the Confederate view from where Pickett's men's, the Confederate attack at Gettysburg stepped off. A mile plus to get to the Union Center, and then the units are all spread out in pretty much a mile wide, a brigade deep. But at Chickamauga, very narrow front with a long tail, long column coming. This is the Union viewpoint coming out of the as before they come out of the woods. This is at a plaque there at Chickamauga. This is an artist's rendition of what it must have looked like. There's the first echelon, and you can see the second one. You can see the third one coming out of the woods, and then there are several more. There are 2 more behind that, and they don't even know that. So it must have been pretty frightening. So
hey, Harold?
Yes.
We're just, it's almost 5:07, so we're close to running out of time.
Okay.
All right. So
I will wrap it up then with the 2 tactical examples here.
All right, because we still have time for Q&A then. So
okay. So General Longstreet penetrates the Union line, collapses the right wing of the army, and then instead of turning left, he turns right. You can see the scheme and maneuver there as he's going to the using the fast go terrain. So his plan is going to be to try and get to the gaps, close off the gaps in Missionary Ridge, and trap and really bag the rest of the Union Army there. Now, General Bragg doesn't fully understand this, and he doesn't give him the reinforcements, and so General Thomas, holds him on Snodgrass Hill. I had these other two pictures here. These are up at the. These are two logs that were cut down in the 20s that show some of the cannonballs that were sitting in the trees up there on Snodgrass Hill. These were from one of the batteries that Longstreet used to try and pound the Union position, but it was too late. It was too dark, so they weren't able to dislodge them before dark. So if we're at the end here, I think maybe I should stop it here and then let go for some Q&A. If that's all right.
Okay. So one question is, all right, how good was Longstreet's relationship with General Lee? And especially in the context of what was Longstreet's relationship with the rest of his fellow officer command corps, if you will, because if you look at Civil War history on the Union side, there was constant bickering and jealousies among the Union command corps. So what was the difference then between the Union and the Confederates that made Longstreet that good a general, or was he compared to everybody else?
That's a really good question. Well, Longstreet, Longstreet had already been in the Army under Joseph Johnston, and he had a very good relationship with Joe Johnston. He was almost like a co-planner with General Johnston out on the Peninsula Campaign, and then Johnston is wounded as they are falling back on Richmond, and then Lee comes into the picture. Just from within 24 hours, 48 hours of General Longstreet and General Lee being together, you already have a quote from General Lee, who was very impressed with General Longstreet, calling him, a capital, something along the lines of General Longstreet is a capital soldier, and everything he says makes a lot of sense to me. And General Lee, started with General Longstreet in the same capacity that he was working with General Johnston, and Longstreet was really very much a co-planner with Lee as a subordinate. And now here's something I bring out. Oh, by the way, I have an article that is in this version, last month's version of North and South. Some of that's in here, and then there'll be one next month which gets to the Chattanooga piece. But as far as the relationship goes, as with him being a co-planner, Lee, I think one of the things I try to say in the context of the problems that they had in Pennsylvania, in the invasion of Pennsylvania, was that Lee was not an infantry branch officer. He was an engineer officer, and he doesn't have any practical experience leading combat arms units. So I believe, in my opinion, that he really relied on Longstreet right from day one, because Longstreet was a long-serving infantry officer with no break in service. So I think the understanding between the two was that I'm going to leave the tactics. I should leave the tactics and the planning of the infantry to Longstreet. I need to do the bigger picture things. And I think Lee got off track with that in Gettysburg, but he works it perfectly with Longstreet at Chancellorsville. I think he did it perfectly with Jackson at Second Manassas. He does it perfectly with Jackson at Chancellorsville, and just gives him broad guidance. And I think throughout the war, that relationship with Lee and Longstreet remains the same all the way to the end, even through to Petersburg. And there are numerous quotes about their relationship. Longstreet saying that Lee and Longstreet were almost like brothers at points. It doesn't mean that they didn't have disagreements on some of the courses of action, but I think Longstreet, the consummate professional, if he was overruled, he carried out his boss's orders to the word as best he could. So I think they were very close. To answer your question in short, I think they were very close, and they relied on each other throughout the whole.
Okay. All right. Another question then. Given that there were a few good political generals or citizen generals, that is, generals who didn't go through West Point or have military training. But given how many did, including Long, who was West Point grad, what made Longstreet different or better than all the rest of his peers who went through West Point?
Well, I guess you could say, take for example, all of the generals who were at the First Manassas. You still, even if they went to West Point, that's one thing, but that's your basic education. But then you have to look at their Army career and their assignments. Are they really in branch assignments, developing themselves? As say, if you're commissioned an infantry branch officer, then you want to do infantry assignments, from the, have lieutenant assignments. Then you want to have captain assignments and major assignments at the battalion and the regiment and lieutenant colonel and colonel. And these are all building blocks to becoming proficient in your branch. Now, if you're a guy there are officers who went to West Point, they may be branched infantry, but then they do all kinds of other things. They may get stuck in the logistics, in logistics units and do that for years. Or a guy like Robert E. Lee, who's an engineer, he did a lot of engineer assignments, but then he did all kinds of other things too. Like, he worked special project. He was a staff. He did a lot of staff work. He was a superintendent at West Point. So, you're not really getting proficient, year after year, grade after grade in your branch. Longstreet was one of these guys who stayed to the infantry the whole time and methodically, thoroughly, year after year, decade after decade, became a very proficient infantry officer. And he had combat experience in Mexico, and he had no break in service. You had a lot of guys who went to West Point, like Stonewall Jackson. He served for a few years, and then he got out of the Army and he became essentially a math teacher at VMI. So he's not in the branch. He's not in the Army and active duty anymore. And you're behind. Really, it is the truth of it. And so that's the difference. Now, a guy like, I think Stonewall Jackson still does well in the war overall before he dies. But there are a lot of other people who don't. And then you have all these kind of people who are just appointed because they have education, lawyers, people who have degrees in divinity, like Leonidas Polk. They really don't know anything, and they have a totally new learning curve. And a lot of people got killed by these kind of people. So I would say what sets Longstreet apart is his continuous, service record within his infantry branch, and that he continues to learn and have these good, these good assignments along the way that I think gave him a big advantage going into the war.
Okay, all right. I'll tell you what, we've passed 7 o'clock.
Okay,
our cutoff point, regretfully, because this has been fascinating, to be honest. So, and I was a Boy Scout. That's as far as I got in terms of military tactics. So I've learned a lot tonight myself, to be perfectly honest. And it was really interesting to compare the different wars with the Civil War and Longstreet. So really enjoyed that very, very much. So thank you. And if you would just stick around for a few minutes after we bump off, that'd be great. So in the meantime, I have a few public announcements to make, if that's okay with everybody. So Harold, forgive me, but we have some programs coming up. So we have a Liberty Series program on, and I think everybody. Okay, you guys can see me then. All right. So on Liberty Series on November the 9th, Economic Policy and the Executive Branch with Steve Moore. Money and Presidents, always an interesting topic. And then we have a Public Affairs program on November the 16th with Dr. Carl Schramm from Syracuse University. And he's working on a book called Saving America's Dying Cities. And no comments about Philadelphia, all right, just so we know. And then our next and last Civil War Roundtable of the year will be on December the 2nd. And it will be Candace Sly Hooper talking about her book on Lincoln's Generals' Wives, 4 women who influenced the Civil War for better and for worse. That should be really interesting. So hopefully we'll see you all 3 nights. And in the meantime, we've got some holidays coming up. So happy Halloween. There's Thanksgiving in there as well. So we hope everybody just stay safe, stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you over the next couple weeks. So thank you all for joining us this evening, everybody. So good night and goodbye.